Hello, our dear Lull Now viewers. Wishing you a fantastic new day, filled with vibrant energy and moments as bright as the morning sun. Today, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this video. What did you love, and what could we do better? Drop your feedback in the comments below. Your input means the world and helps us make the channel even better. If you're vibing with the stories and energy of Lull Now, don't forget to hit that like button to show some love and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a new video. Let's spread the positive vibes and dive into thrilling mysteries together. The small town of Randolph, Maine, sits on the edge of a wilderness so vast and ancient. It feels like it's been here since the world was young. Randolph Forest stretches for miles, its towering pines and tangled undergrowth cloaked in a perpetual fog that seems to swallow sound and light. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and even on the brightest days, the forest feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to disturb its restless slumber. Locals call it the Hollow, a name whispered with a glance over the shoulder, as if saying it too loudly might summon the very thing they fear. For generations, the people of Randolph have passed down a tale that's as much a warning as it is a story. It's the kind of legend that grandparents tell their grandchildren on stormy nights, when the wind howls through the pines and the firelight flickers on the walls. It's a tale of the Wailing Shade, a spectral figure said to haunt the forest's heart. Its decayed body draped in tattered rags, its hollow eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Those who've seen it and survived describe a stench like rotting flesh, a wail that pierces the soul, and a presence so malevolent it feels like the forest itself is alive, watching, waiting. The legend begins with Eleanor Nora Quinn, a woman whose name still sends shivers down the spines of Randolph's older residents. In the early 1960s, Nora was a recluse, living alone in a crumbling cabin deep within the forest. She was 60 years old then, her hair a wild tangle of silver, her eyes sharp and knowing, like she could see secrets no one else could. Nora was an herbalist, skilled in the old ways of healing with plants and roots, a craft she'd learned from her grandmother, who'd come from Ireland with tales of the Sidhe and the spirits of the land. To the townsfolk, though, Nora was something else entirely. A witch, a sorceress, a woman who'd made a pact with forces best left undisturbed. Nora's cabin was a ramshackle structure of weathered planks and sagging beams, its windows boarded up against the endless Maine winters. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pines so tall they seemed to scrape the sky, their needles forming a carpet that muffled footsteps and gave the place an eerie silence. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dried herbs, sage, thyme, and something bitter no one could name. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with jars of roots and powders, while strange symbols were carved into the doorframe, symbols that no one in town could read, but everyone feared. Nora rarely came to Randolph, and when she did, it was at dawn or dusk, her basket filled with foraged plants, her gaze fixed on the ground, as if she could hear the earth itself whispering. The townspeople had always been wary of Nora, but their unease turned to dread in the summer of 1964. That year, a drought gripped Maine, and crops withered in the fields. Livestock sickened, and wells ran dry. Whispers spread that Nora was to blame, that her unnatural practices had angered the land. Children were forbidden to play near the forest's edge, and hunters avoided the trails they'd once roamed freely. Stories began to circulate. tales of lights flickering in the forest at night, of voices calling from the trees, of shadows that moved against the wind. Some said Nora was brewing potions to curse the town. Others swore they'd seen her standing in the clearing, chanting under the moonlight, her silhouette framed by a massive pine tree that locals called the Sentinel. The Sentinel was no ordinary tree. It stood at the heart of Randolph Forest, its trunk so wide it would take 3 people to encircle it, its branches gnarled and twisted like the fingers of some ancient giant. Its roots sprawled across the clearing, breaking through the earth like veins, and its bark was etched with markings that looked too deliberate to be natural. Old-timers said the Sentinel was sacred, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. They told of Algonquin legends, of spirits bound to trees, of rituals that could tie a soul to the land forever. To Nora, the Sentinel was more than a tree. It was her anchor, her protector, the source of her strength. To the townsfolk, it was the root of her power and the source of their fear. By the winter of 1965, the town's paranoia reached a fever pitch. A group of loggers, hardened men who'd worked the forest for years, decided to confront Nora. They'd heard rumors of missing trappers, of hunters who'd ventured into the hollow and never returned. They believed Nora was hiding something, maybe a secret stash of stolen goods, maybe something darker. On a night when a blizzard swept through Maine, the loggers set out for her cabin, their lanterns casting feeble light against the snow. They were 6 in number, armed with axes and rifles, their breath steaming in the freezing air. They vowed to drag Nora back to town, to make her answer for the strange happenings in the forest. What happened next is the heart of the legend, the moment that birthed the Wailing Shade. The loggers reached the cabin, its windows glowing faintly through the storm. They pounded on the door, shouting Nora's name. But there was no answer. The wind howled, carrying a sound like a woman's cry, and the men hesitated, their courage faltering. One of them, a man named Thomas Reed, kicked the door open, and the group stormed inside. The cabin was empty, or so it seemed. The fire in the hearth was cold, the jars on the shelves untouched, but the air was thick with that bitter, unnameable scent. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse in the lantern light, and the men felt a chill that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. Then they heard it, a wail, low and guttural, rising from the clearing outside. The loggers stumbled out of the cabin, their lanterns swinging wildly, and there, by the Sentinel, they saw her. Nora stood motionless, her silver hair whipping in the wind, her eyes fixed on the tree. Some say she was chanting, her voice blending with the storm. Others swear she was already dead, her body upright only by some unholy force. The wail grew louder, and the men froze as a shadow detached itself from the tree. A figure of decayed flesh and hollow eyes, its tattered form moving with a jerky, unnatural grace. The Wailing Shade had been born. The loggers fled, their screams lost in the blizzard. None of them made it back to Randolph. Search parties found no trace of the men, only their lanterns, scattered and broken, near the Sentinel. Nora's cabin was empty, her belongings untouched, as if she'd vanished into the storm. The townsfolk sealed the forest's trails, declaring the hollow cursed. They said Nora had bound her soul to the Sentinel, that her rituals had gone wrong, creating a spirit of rage and decay that would haunt the forest forever. The Wailing Shade, they claimed, was her vengeance, a guardian of the hollow that punished anyone who trespassed on its domain. Over the decades, the legend grew. Hikers reported strange sightings, footprints that appeared and vanished, whispers in the fog, a stench like rotting meat that followed them through the trees. In the 1980s, a group of teenagers dared each other to spend a night near the cabin. Only one returned, babbling about a thing with no face that chased them through the dark. In the 2000s, a paranormal investigator set up cameras around the Sentinel, only to find his equipment destroyed, the footage showing nothing but static and a faint, wailing sound. Even animals seemed to avoid the forest's heart, the birds falling silent, the deer steering clear of the clearing where the Sentinel stood. Randolph's residents learned to live with the legend, but they never forgot it. The forest became a place of whispered warnings, a boundary no one crossed lightly. Parents told their children to stay away from the hollow, to never speak Nora's name after dark. Yet the story of the Wailing Shade endured, passed down through generations, a tale of a woman wronged, a ritual gone awry, and a forest that held its secrets close. The Sentinel still stands, its roots deeper than ever, its branches casting shadows that seem to move when no one's looking. And somewhere in the fog, the Wailing Shade waits, its wail a reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. That's just the beginning of the curse of Randolph Forest. What happened to Nora Quinn? And what does the Wailing Shade want with those who enter the hollow? In the next chapter, we'll follow 4 teens who thought they could debunk this legend and paid a price they'll never forget. Drop a comment. Do you think the Wailing Shade is real, or just a story to scare kids? Smash that like button and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss what happens next. The forest is calling. Will you answer? In the sleepy town of Randolph, Maine, the legend of Randolph Forest was more than just a ghost story. It was a challenge. For the kids growing up in the shadow of the hollow, the tales of the Wailing Shade were as familiar as the sound of the Kennebec River or the smell of pine sap in the summer. Every Halloween, someone would dare a friend to walk the forest's edge at midnight, and every year, the stories grew wilder. A hiker who heard whispers in the fog, a hunter who swore he saw a figure with hollow eyes, a camper whose tent was torn apart by something that wasn't an animal. But to the teenagers of Randolph High, the legend was just that, a story, a myth, something to laugh about over milkshakes at the diner on Main Street. That changed in the fall of 2024, when 4 friends decided to take on the hollow for a school project that would become their undoing. Amelia Harper, a 17-year-old junior with a knack for storytelling, was the group's unofficial leader. With her sharp wit and a notebook full of half-written articles, Amelia dreamed of being a journalist, the kind who broke big stories and made people listen. She'd grown up hearing about Nora Quinn and the Wailing Shade, but to her it was all folklore, a puzzle to unravel for her blog, Randolph Uncovered. She pitched the idea to her friends, a weekend camping trip in Randolph Forest to film a documentary, debunk the myth, and score an A in their history class. "It's just a creepy old forest," she said, her hazel eyes glinting with determination. "We'll prove there's nothing to be afraid of." Lucas Bennett, 18 and a senior, was the group's tech guru. Tall and lanky, with a mop of dark hair and a perpetual smirk, Lucas was the guy who could fix a crashed laptop or rig a drone to fly in a storm. He didn't believe in ghosts. His world was made of code and circuits, but he loved a challenge. Armed with a GoPro, a drone, and a portable charger, Lucas saw the trip as a chance to make a viral video. "If there's a whaling shade, I'll get it on camera," he boasted, adjusting his glasses. "And if not, we'll still get 1 million views for the vibes." He'd spent hours researching Randolph Forest online, digging up grainy photos of Nora's cabin and old newspaper clippings about the missing loggers from 1965. To him, the legend was a mix of bad luck and small-town hysteria, nothing a good zoom lens couldn't explain. Sophie Chen, a 16-year-old sophomore, was the quiet one, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke. Small and wiry, with long black hair she kept in a braid, Sophie had a passion for history that made her the group's secret weapon. She'd read every book in the Randolph Library about Maine's past, from Algonquin legends to the witch hunts of the 17th century. Sophie was fascinated by Nora Quinn, not as a villain but as a woman misunderstood. People called her a witch because she was different, Sophie said softly, clutching her cross necklace, a gift from her grandmother. Maybe she was just trying to help. Sophie wasn't thrilled about camping in the hollow. She'd heard the stories of the sentinel tree and the wailing shades wail, but she trusted Amelia and wanted to uncover the truth about Nora's life. Mason Rivera, 19 and a freshman at the local community college, was the group's thrill-seeker, broad-shouldered and restless, with a grin that could charm anyone. Mason lived for adrenaline. He'd spent his summers kayaking the Kennebec, climbing cliffs in Acadia, and sneaking into abandoned mills with his skateboard. To Mason, the legend of the Wailing Shade was a dare, a chance to prove he wasn't afraid of anything. "Ghost or no ghost, I'm not running," he said, tossing a football between his hands. "Let's make this trip epic." Mason didn't care about the history or the footage. He wanted an adventure, something to tell stories about at parties. But deep down, even he felt a twinge of unease about the hollow, a place his older brother had warned him to avoid. The plan was simple. Hike into Randolph Forest on a crisp October Friday, set up camp near the old trails, and spend 2 nights filming, exploring, and debunking the legend. Amelia had mapped out the route, using a topo map she'd borrowed from the library. Lucas had packed enough tech to film a Hollywood movie, including motion sensor cameras to catch any ghostly activity. Sophie brought a notebook to sketch the cabin and any symbols they found, hoping to connect them to Nora's herbalist work. Mason carried the heavy stuff, tents, a cooler, and a hatchet for firewood, grinning like he was heading to a music festival. They told their parents they were camping at a state park, leaving out the part about the hollow. After all, they were just kids making a video, not ghost hunters looking for trouble. Friday afternoon, as the sun dipped low over Randolph, the 4 friends gathered at the forest's edge. The trailhead was marked by a faded sign, its letters barely legible. "Randolph Forest, enter at your own risk." The air was cool, carrying the sharp tang of pine and the faint earthy scent of decay. The pines loomed overhead, their branches weaving a canopy that blocked out the sky, casting the trail in a twilight gloom. Fog curled around the trunks, thick enough to obscure the path ahead, and the only sounds were the crunch of their boots and the occasional caw of a crow. Amelia led the way, her backpack bouncing as she narrated into her phone's voice recorder. "Day 1, 4:37 p.m., she said, her voice steady but a little too loud. "We're entering Randolph Forest to uncover the truth about the Wailing Shade. Stay tuned for history, mystery, and maybe a scare, or now available." Lucas fiddled with his drone, launching it into the air to capture aerial shots of the forest. The drone's hum was the only modern sound in the vast silence, and even that felt swallowed by the forest's weight. Sophie walked beside Sophie, her eyes scanning the trees for signs of Nora's cabin or the sentinel tree. She'd read about the Algonquin belief that certain trees held spirits, and the thought made her grip her necklace tighter. Mason brought up the rear, whistling a tune to break the tension, but his eyes darted to the shadows, as if expecting something to leap out. The forest felt alive, its silence not peaceful but heavy, like it was watching, waiting. The deeper they went, the colder it got, the air prickling their skin despite their jackets. The fog thickened, wrapping the pines in a ghostly shroud, and the trail seemed to twist in ways that didn't match Amelia's map. After an hour of hiking, they reached a clearing near a narrow stream, its water black and still under the fog. The clearing was wide enough for 2 tents, with a circle of stones that suggested someone had camped here before. The pines encircled the space, their branches forming a natural wall, and in the distance the faint outline of a larger tree. The sentinel, perhaps, loomed through the mist. Amelia dropped her backpack, grinning. "This is perfect," she said, pulling out her phone to snap photos. "We'll set up here, film some intro shots, and explore the cabin tomorrow." Lucas set up his motion sensors around the clearing, their red lights blinking like eyes in the dusk. Sophie knelt by the stream, sketching the clearing in her notebook, her pencil moving quickly to capture the eerie beauty. Mason started a fire, stacking logs with the ease of someone who'd camped his whole life, though his usual swagger seemed muted by the forest's presence. As night fell, the clearing transformed. The fire's glow cast flickering shadows on the pines, making them dance like figures in a dream. The fog grew denser, swallowing the stars, and the temperature plummeted, forcing the teens to huddle close to the flames. They roasted marshmallows, trying to keep things light, but their laughter felt forced, echoing strangely in the stillness. Amelia shared stories from her research, recounting the 1965 logger's disappearance and Nora's supposed rituals. Maybe she was just lonely, she mused, staring into the fire. Living out here, no one to talk to. That'd make anyone a little weird. Sophie nodded, her voice soft. I think she was trying to protect something. The forest, maybe. But it went wrong. Lucas snorted, adjusting his GoPro. Or she was just a creepy old lady who liked scaring people. No offense, Soph, but ghosts aren't real. Mason tossed a stick into the fire, his grin crooked. Yeah, then why do you keep looking over your shoulder, tech boy? The banter faded as the forest's sounds, or lack thereof, pressed in. There were no crickets, no owls, just a silence so thick it felt like a weight on their chests. The fire crackled, but even its warmth couldn't chase away the chill that settled into their bones. Sophie clutched her necklace, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the clearing. Amelia tried to record a video intro, but her voice wavered, and she stopped, laughing nervously. Okay, maybe this place is creepier than I thought. Lucas's motion sensors stayed silent, their lights steady, but he checked them obsessively, as if expecting them to flare. Mason sharpened a stick with his pocket knife, his movements tense like he was preparing for a fight. Then just past 10 p.m., they heard it. A sound that wasn't the wind or an animal. It was faint at first, like leaves rustling, but it grew into a slow, deliberate crunch, as if something heavy was moving through the undergrowth. The teens froze, their flashlights snapping to the trees, The fire flickered, its flames dipping low despite the lack of a breeze. Amelia stood, her phone's light trembling in her hand. "Hello?" she called, her voice swallowed by the fog. No answer, but the crunching stopped, replaced by a low, mournful wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't human, not quite, but it carried a weight of sorrow and rage that made their hearts race. Sophie gasped, backing toward the fire, while Lucas fumbled with his GoPro, muttering, "This is nuts." Mason gripped his hatchet, his knuckles white. "That's not a bear," he said, his voice low. "Bears don't sound like that." The wail faded, leaving a silence even heavier than before. The teens huddled together, their flashlights sweeping the clearing, but the fog was too thick, the pines too dense. Amelia's journalist instincts kicked in, and she started recording a voice memo, her words tumbling out. October 17th, 2024, 10:23 p.m. We heard something. A wail, like in the stories. It's real. I don't know what it is, but it's out there. Sophie whispered a prayer, her eyes wide with fear but also a strange resolve, like she'd known this was coming. Lucas's skepticism cracked, his hands shaking as he checked his sensors again. Still nothing. Mason stood at the clearing's edge, hatchet raised, daring whatever it was to show itself. "Come on," he shouted, but his voice broke, betraying his bravado. For the rest of the night, they stayed awake, the fire their only anchor in the darkness. The wail didn't return, but the forest felt different now, alive in a way that wasn't natural. Every snap of a twig, every shift in the fog, sent their pulses racing. Amelia kept her phone recording, documenting every sound, every feeling, as if it might save them. Sophie sketched furiously, her drawings now filled with shadows and hollow eyes. Lucas watched his drone's footage, zooming in on blurry shapes that might have been branches, or something else. Mason never put down his hatchet, his eyes fixed on the trees, his earlier thrill-seeking replaced by a grim determination. As dawn approached, the fog thinned, and the first rays of light pierced the canopy, revealing a forest that looked almost normal. The clearing was untouched, the fire reduced to embers, the tents still standing. But the teens were changed, their faces pale, their eyes haunted. They'd come to debunk a legend, to laugh at a ghost story. But the wailing shade had found them, and this was only the beginning. The clearing in Randolph Forest, Maine, was a fragile island of light in a sea of darkness. The campfire's glow flickered weakly, its embers struggling against the damp chill that seeped from the surrounding pines. The fog had thickened since dusk, curling around the teens' tents like a living thing, its tendrils snuffing out the stars and turning the forest into a labyrinth of shadows. Amelia Harper, Lucas Bennett, Sophie Chen, and Mason Rivera sat huddled around the fire, their faces pale in the orange light, their breath visible in the October air. The wail they'd heard an hour ago, low, mournful, and impossibly close, had shattered their bravado, leaving them on edge, their flashlights clutched like lifelines. Amelia, the 17-year-old aspiring journalist, tried to keep her voice steady as she recorded a voice memo on her phone. October 17th, 2024, 11:12 p.m. She whispered, her hazel eyes darting to the trees. "We heard something out there. It wasn't an animal. It sounded human, but wrong, like the stories about the wailing shade." Her notebook lay open on her lap, its pages filled with notes about Nora Quinn and the 1965 logger's disappearance. But the words felt distant now, like a script for someone else's story. Amelia had come to Randolph Forest to debunk a myth, to prove the hollow was just trees and fog, but the whale had cracked her certainty. She glanced at her friends, hoping they'd laugh it off, but their faces mirrored her own unease. Lucas, the 18-year-old tech whiz, was crouched by his motion sensor cameras, his glasses fogging up as he checked their feeds. Nothing, he muttered, his voice tight. No heat signatures, no movement. Those sensors should have picked up something. His GoPro was propped on a rock, recording the clearing, but the drone he'd flown earlier was grounded, its battery drained despite being fully charged. Lucas had scoffed at the legend of the Wailing Shade, dismissing it as small-town nonsense, but the whale had rattled him. He kept replaying the sound in his head, a guttural cry that seemed to vibrate in his bones like it was calling his name. He adjusted his hoodie, trying to hide his shaken hands, and forced a smirk. Probably just the wind, right? Or some creepy bird. Maine's got weird wildlife. Sophie, the 16-year-old history buff, sat cross-legged by the fire, her braid tucked into her jacket, her cross necklace glinting as she clutched it. Her sketchbook was open to a drawing of the clearing, but her pencil lay still, her fingers too tense to move. Sophie had always been the quiet one, the listener, but now her mind raced with the stories she'd read. Algonquin tales of spirits bound to trees, New England legends of cursed lands. The whale reminded her of something she'd found in the Randolph Library, a 1960s journal mentioning Nora Quinn's Songs to the Forest, rituals that locals feared. That wasn't a bird, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. It felt alive, like it knew we were here. Her eyes flicked to the fog, where the pines seemed to lean closer, their branches clawing at the sky. Mason, the 19-year-old thrill-seeker, stood at the clearing's edge, his hatchet gripped tightly, his broad shoulders tense. He'd been the loudest earlier, joking about ghosts and tossing marshmallows into the fire. But now his grin was gone, replaced by a hard, determined stare. Mason had grown up in Randolph, kayaking its rivers and climbing its cliffs. But the hollow was different. His older brother had told him stories, hikers who vanished, campers who heard voices, and Mason had brushed them off as exaggerations. But the whale had hit him like a punch, stirring a primal fear he couldn't shake. "Whatever's out there, it's messing with us," he said, his voice low. "I say we go find it. Show it we're not scared." His words were brave, but his eyes betrayed him, scanning the darkness as if expecting the Wailing Shade to step out of the fog. The clearing felt smaller now, the fire's light barely reaching the tents. The stream nearby gurgled faintly, its sound muffled by the fog, and the pines stood like silent sentinels, their needles absorbing every whisper. The teens had planned to sleep in shifts, keeping the fire going, but sleep seemed impossible after the whale. Amelia tucked her notebook into her backpack, her journalist instincts urging her to document everything. "We need to stay calm," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "It could be a prank, someone from town trying to scare us. Let's check the perimeter, make sure we're alone." Lucas nodded, grabbing his flashlight, but Sophie hesitated, her fingers tracing the cross. "What if it's not a prank?" she asked. "What if it's her?" Mason snorted, but it was half-hearted. "Nora Quinn's dead, Soph. Dead people don't wail." They split up briefly to check the clearing's edges, staying within sight of the fire. Lucas swept his flashlight across the pines, his beam catching glints of frost on the needles. Sophie stayed close to the tents, her eyes on the stream, where the water seemed to ripple without a breeze. Amelia walked toward the trail they'd followed, her phone recording as she narrated. "The fog's thicker now," she said, her voice steadying. "Visibility's maybe 10 feet. No sign of anyone, but the air feels heavy, like it's pressing down." Mason prowled the opposite side, his hatchet ready, his footsteps loud in the silence. He wanted to believe it was a coyote or a prankster, but the wail had sounded too close, too deliberate, like it knew their names. Then it happened again, a rustling in the fog, faint but unmistakable, like leaves being crushed underfoot. The teens froze, their flashlights converging on the sound. The rustling grew louder, circling the clearing, accompanied by a stench that hit them like a wave, rotting meat, damp earth, and something sour, like bile. Amelia gagged, covering her nose while Lucas's flashlight shook, its beam darting wildly. Sophie backed toward the fire, whispering a prayer, her sketchbook slipping to the ground. Mason raised his hatchet, his voice sharp. "Who's there? Show yourself!" The rustling stopped, but the stench lingered, thick and suffocating, as if the forest itself was exhaling decay. The fire flared suddenly, its flames shooting higher, casting grotesque shadows on the pines. Then they heard it, a wail, louder this time, a guttural cry that seemed to claw at their minds. It wasn't just sound. It was a force, a wave of despair and rage that made their knees buckle. Amelia dropped her phone, the screen cracking as it hit a rock. Lucas's GoPro fell, its lens pointing uselessly at the dirt. Sophie screamed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the wail, while Mason stumbled back, his hatchet slipping from his grip. The wail grew, echoing from the trees, the stream, the fog, until it felt like the forest itself was screaming. And then they saw it. From the fog, at the clearing's edge, a figure emerged. It was tall and skeletal, its body draped in tattered rags that hung like peeling skin. Its face was a nightmare, hollow sockets where eyes should have been, a gaping mouth that oozed shadows, its flesh decayed and sagging, revealing bone beneath. The wailing shade stood motionless for a moment, its head tilted, as if studying them, its presence a violation of everything natural. The stench intensified, choking the air, and the temperature plummeted, frost forming on the tents despite the fire's heat. The shade raised its arms, its fingers long and claw-like, and let out another wail, a sound that wasn't just heard but felt, a blade slicing through their courage. Amelia's scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate, as she grabbed Sophie's arm. "Run!" she shouted, pulling the younger girl toward the tents. Lucas scrambled for his GoPro, his hands fumbling, his skepticism shattered by the sight of the shade. Holy crap, he stammered, backing away, his flashlight beam locked on the figure. Sophie clung to her necklace, her prayers a jumbled whisper, her eyes wide with terror, but also a flicker of recognition, as if she'd seen this in her nightmares. Mason lunged for his hatchet, his thrill-seeker's bravado replaced by survival instinct. "Get to the trail," he yelled, his voice cracking as he swung the hatchet at the air, a futile gesture against the shade's unearthly form. The shade moved, its steps jerky and wrong, like a puppet on broken strings. It glided toward the clearing, its wail rising, its hollow eyes fixed on the teens. The fire dimmed, its flames shrinking as if starved of oxygen, and the fog thickened, swallowing the pines. Amelia grabbed her backpack, her notebook spilling onto the ground, and yanked Sophie toward the trail. Lucas tripped over a root, his glasses nearly falling off, but he kept running, his GoPro dangling from its strap. Sophie's sketchbook lay abandoned, its pages fluttering in the sudden wind. Mason brought up the rear, his hatchet raised, shouting curses to mask his fear. But the shade was relentless, its wail following them like a hunter's call. The teens sprinted into the fog, the trail barely visible, their flashlights cutting weak paths through the darkness. The pines seemed to close in, their branches snagging at their jackets, their roots tripping their feet. The stench pursued them, a physical weight that made their lungs burn, and the wail echoed, now joined by other sounds, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, whispers that might have been their names. Amelia's phone, still recording, caught her ragged breathing and Sophie's stifled sobs. Lucas's motion sensors, left behind, finally triggered, their alarms blaring uselessly in the empty clearing. Mason's hatchet felt heavy, his arm aching, but he didn't dare look back, afraid of what he'd see. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a predator, its shadows alive, its fog a trap. The teens ran blindly, their plan to debunk the legend forgotten, their only thought survival. The wailing shade was real, and it was hunting them. The Hollow had claimed its intruders, just as it had the loggers in 1965, just as it had claimed Nora Quinn's soul. And as the teens fled, the sentinel tree loomed in the distance, its gnarled branches watching, waiting, the heart of a curse that was only beginning to unfold. The fog in Randolph Forest was a living thing, a cold, suffocating shroud that choked the pines and swallowed the world. The teens, Amelia Harper, Lucas Bennett, Sophie Chen, and Mason Rivera, ran blindly through the Hollow, their flashlights carving weak paths through the darkness, their breaths ragged in the freezing air. The wailing shade was behind them, its guttural wail echoing through the trees, its stench of rotten flesh and bile, a constant reminder that it was close, too close. The clearing where they'd camped, with its flickering fire and scattered gear, was a distant memory, replaced by a labyrinth of gnarled roots, twisted branches, and a forest that seemed to shift around them, as if guiding them deeper into its cursed heart. Amelia, the 17-year-old journalist, led the charge, her backpack bouncing as she clutched Sophie's hand. Her phone, its screen cracked from the chaos in the clearing, was still recording, capturing her gasps and the crunch of pine needles underfoot. "Keep moving," she shouted, her voice hoarse but determined. Her hazel eyes scanned the fog, searching for the trail they'd followed earlier. But the path was gone, replaced by a maze of trees that looked identical in the gloom. Amelia's mind raced, replaying the legend of Nora Quinn and the 1965 loggers who'd vanished in this forest. She'd come to debunk the wailing shade, to prove it was just a story, but the decayed figure they'd seen, its hollow eyes, its jerky movements, was no myth. It was real, and it wanted them. Lucas, the 18-year-old techie, stumbled behind, his GoPro dangling from its strap, his glasses fogged with sweat and frost. His motion sensor cameras left in the clearing were useless now, and his drone was a lost cause, its battery drained by the forest's unnatural cold. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his skepticism crumbling with every step. The wail, low, mournful, and laced with rage, seemed to follow him, vibrating in his chest like a warning. Lucas had laughed off Sophie's talk of spirits, but the shade's presence was undeniable, a violation of everything he understood about the world. His flashlight flickered, its beam weakening, and he tripped over a root, his hands scraping the frozen ground. "Amelia, where's the trail?" he called, his voice cracking. But Amelia didn't answer. She couldn't hear him over the wail. Sophie, the 16-year-old history enthusiast, clung to Amelia, her braid unraveling, her cross necklace bouncing against her chest. Her sketchbook was gone, left in the clearing with her drawings of the sentinel tree and the symbols she'd hoped to decode. Sophie's fear was a living thing, clawing at her heart, but beneath it was a spark of resolve. She'd read about Nora Quinn's rituals, about the Sentinel's power, and the wail felt familiar, like a cry she'd imagined while studying old journals. "It's her," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling but certain. "Nora, she's still here." Her prayers were a steady rhythm, a shield against the terror, but her eyes darted to the shadows where the pines seemed to move, their branches reaching like fingers. Sophie wanted to believe they could escape, but the forest felt alive, its fog a trap, its silence a predator. Mason, the 19-year-old thrill-seeker, brought up the rear, his hatchet gripped like a lifeline, his broad frame hunched against the cold. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a grim determination to survive. Mason had faced danger before, raging rivers, steep cliffs, but the Wailing Shade was something else, something that didn't belong in the world. Its wail stirred memories of his brother's warnings about the Hollow. Stories he'd dismissed as campfire tales. Now those stories were real, and the Shade was hunting them. "Keep going," he shouted, his voice raw, his eyes scanning the fog for the creature's silhouette. His hatchet felt useless against a spirit, but it was all he had, a symbol of his refusal to give up. Mason's heart pounded, his lungs burning, but he stayed close to his friends, ready to fight if the Shade caught up. The forest was a nightmare, its terrain a cruel maze designed to trap them. Roots snagged their boots, branches tore at their jackets, and the fog distorted every sound, making the wail seem to come from all directions. The stench followed them, a choking cloud that made their eyes water and their stomachs churn. Amelia's flashlight caught glimpses of the pines, their trunks etched with faint, unnatural markings, symbols like the ones Sophie had sketched, remnants of Nora's rituals. The teens' plan to debunk the legend was a distant dream, replaced by a primal need to survive, to outrun the thing that hunted them. Then, the group split. It happened in a heartbeat, a moment of panic that tore them apart. Amelia and Sophie veered left, following what they thought was the trail, their hands still clasped. Lucas, disoriented by the fog, stumbled right, his flashlight flickering as he called out, "Guys, wait!" Mason, trying to cover their retreat, turned to face the wail, his hatchet raised, but the fog swallowed his friends' silhouettes, leaving him alone. The wail surged, louder now, and the Shade's presence grew heavier, its stench a physical weight. The teens were separated, each one a lone target in the Hollow's endless dark. Amelia and Sophie ran through a thicket of pines, their breaths hitching as the wail followed. Amelia's phone kept recording, its battery draining fast, capturing her frantic whispers. "We lost Lucas and Mason," she said, her voice shaking. "The Shade's still out there. We need to find the trail." Sophie's prayers grew louder, her cross necklace a talisman against the fear. She spotted a gnarled tree ahead, its roots sprawling like veins, and recognized it from her research. "That's close to the Sentinel," she gasped. "Nora's cabin might be near." Amelia nodded, her journalist's mind grasping at the idea. If they could find the cabin, maybe they could hide, regroup, survive. But the wail was closer now, and the fog seemed to pulse, as if the forest was guiding them toward the Sentinel and the Shade. Lucas staggered through a ravine, his flashlight nearly dead, his GoPro swinging wildly. The wail was relentless, echoing in his skull, and the stench made him gag. He tripped again, his glasses falling into the dirt, and scrambled to retrieve them, his hands shaking. "This isn't real," he muttered, but the words felt hollow. A shadow moved in the fog, a tall, decayed figure with hollow eyes, and Lucas froze, his heart stopping. The shade was there, barely 10 feet away, its head tilted, as if listening. Lucas held his breath, his body pressed against a pine, and the shade glided past, its wail fading slightly. He ran, his glasses smudged, his mind racing. He needed to find his friends, to get out of the hollow, but the forest seemed to twist around him, the trail looping back on itself. Mason stood his ground, his hatchet raised, his eyes locked on the fog. The wail was deafening now, and the shade emerged, its skeletal form lurching toward him. Mason swung the hatchet, his arm fueled by fear and defiance, but the blade passed through the shade like smoke, the air turning colder with each swing. "Come on," he roared, his voice breaking. The shade's claw-like fingers grazed his arm, leaving a burning chill that numbed his muscles. Mason stumbled back, his hatchet slipping, and ran, his bravado crumbling. The shade pursued, its wail a constant pressure, its stench a cloud that clung to him. Mason's mind flashed to the loggers, to Nora's curse, and he wondered if this was how they'd felt, hunted, helpless, lost. The teens' flight was a desperate dance, each step a battle against the forest and the shade. Amelia and Sophie pushed through brambles, their faces scratched, their lungs burning. They glimpsed the sentinel in the distance, its massive trunk a beacon in the fog. But the wail was closer, the shade's shadow flickering in their peripheral vision. Lucas climbed out of the ravine, his flashlight dead, his GoPro's battery failing. But he kept running, guided by instinct and fear. Mason crashed through a stream, the icy water soaking his boots, the shade's wail driving him forward. The forest was a predator, its fog a net, its pines a cage, and the wailing shade was its hunter, relentless and unstoppable. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was meaningless in the hollow. The teens' strength waned, their bodies aching, their minds fraying. Amelia's phone died, its final recording a garbled mix of wails and sobs. Sophie's prayers became a mantra, her voice hoarse but unbroken. Lucas's glasses were cracked, his GoPro useless, but he clung to the hope of finding his friends. Mason's arm throbbed where the shade had touched him, his hatchet lost in the stream, but he refused to stop, his survival instinct stronger than his fear. As dawn's first light crept through the fog, the wail softened, the stench fading slightly. The shade's pursuit slowed, its form retreating into the pines, as if bound to the night. Amelia and Sophie collapsed near a fallen log, their hands still clasped, their bodies trembling. Lucas stumbled into a clearing, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning for his friends. Mason leaned against a tree, his breath ragged, his arm numb but his resolve intact. They were alive, but they were scattered, lost in the hollow's depths, with the sentinel tree and Nora's cabin, somewhere close. The wailing shade was still out there, its wail a promise of return, and the teens knew their fight was far from over. The fog in Randolph Forest was a relentless predator, its icy tendrils wrapping around the pines, choking the air, and blurring the line between reality and nightmare. Dawn's faint light offered no relief, only a pale, ghostly glow that made the hollow feel more alive, more vengeful. Amelia Harper, Lucas Bennett, Sophie Chen, and Mason Rivera had been running for hours, their bodies battered, their minds frayed by the Wailing Shade's pursuit. The decayed spirit, its hollow eyes, tattered flesh, and bone-chilling wail had hunted them through the forest, splitting them apart in a maze of fog and shadows. Now, exhausted and desperate, they'd found refuge in the one place they'd hoped to avoid, Nora Quinn's abandoned cabin, the heart of the curse that had claimed the 1965 loggers and countless others. Amelia, the 17-year-old journalist, leaned against the cabin's sagging wall, her breath ragged, her cracked phone useless in her pocket. Her notebook was gone, lost in the chaos of their flight, but her mind clung to the need to document, to understand. "We're here," she whispered, her hazel eyes scanning the cramped, musty room, Nora's cabin. "If there's a way to stop the Shade, it's here." Her leadership had kept them moving, but fear gnawed at her. Fear of the wail, the stench, the thing that wasn't human. She glanced at Sophie, curled up on the floor, and Mason, guarding the door, and felt a surge of responsibility. They'd followed her into the hollow to debunk a legend, and now they were fighting for their lives. Lucas, the 18-year-old techie, sat on a rickety chair, his glasses cracked, his GoPro dead from the forest's unnatural cold. His motion sensors and drone were lost, his skepticism shattered by the Shade's decayed form. "This place is a death trap," he muttered, his voice tight, his hands shaking as he clutched a rusty lantern he'd found on a shelf. The cabin's air was thick with the scent of mold and herbs, and Lucas's mind raced, trying to rationalize the impossible, the wail from the clearing, the chase through the fog. It defied logic, but the Shade was real, and it was coming for them. He scanned the room, hoping for something, anything, to explain the nightmare. But the symbols carved into the walls only deepened his dread. Sophie, the 16-year-old history buff, knelt by a crumbling table, her braid loose, her cross necklace glinting in the lantern's light. Her sketchbook was gone, but her memory held the symbols she'd drawn, the ones tied to Nora's rituals. "This is where it started," she said softly, her voice steady despite her fear. "Nora's curse. The sentinel tree." Sophie's research had fueled their trip, her fascination with Nora as a misunderstood healer, driving her to uncover the truth. The wail, the stench, the Shade's hollow eyes, they matched the stories she'd read, the Algonquin legends of spirits bound to sacred trees. She prayed silently, her fingers tracing the cross, but her eyes were sharp, searching the cabin for answers. Sophie felt a connection to Nora, a woman wronged by fear and rumor, and she believed the key to stopping the Shade lay in understanding her. Mason, the 19-year-old thrill-seeker, stood by the door, his broad frame tense, his arm throbbing where the Shade's icy touch had grazed him. His hatchet was gone, lost in the stream during their flight, but his fists were clenched, ready to fight. "It's out there," he said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the fog beyond the cracked window. "I can feel it." Mason's bravado had fueled their adventure, his need for adrenaline pushing them into the hollow, but the Shade had stripped away his swagger. The wail echoed in his head, stirring memories of his brother's warnings about the forest, and the numbness in his arm felt like a warning of worse to come. Mason wasn't running anymore. He'd fight for his friends, for himself, for a chance to see the sunrise. The cabin was a relic of Nora's life, its walls sagging under decades of neglect, its floor littered with broken glass and dried leaves. Shelves held jars of herbs, sage, thyme, and something bitter that stung their noses, while a rusted stove sat cold in the corner. The symbols carved into the doorframe and beams were intricate, spiraling patterns that seemed to shift in the lantern's flicker, reminiscent of the markings on the sentinel tree. The air was heavy, not just with dampness but with a presence, as if the cabin itself was watching, waiting. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, and the pines loomed, their branches scratching the roof like claws. The wail was distant now, but it lingered, a promise of the shade's return. Amelia paced the room, her journalist's instincts kicking in. We need to find something. Letters, a diary, anything about Nora's rituals. She rummaged through a splintered chest, pulling out faded cloths and cracked pottery, her hands trembling but purposeful. Sophie joined her, her eyes scanning the shelves, her fingers brushing the symbols. "These are protective," she said, her voice hushed. "Like wards." Nora wasn't cursing the forest. She was trying to guard it. Lucas snorted, but it was weak, his usual skepticism muted. Guard it from what? Us? Mason stayed by the door, his ear pressed to the wood, listening for the wail. "Whatever she did, it's killing us now," he said. "We need a plan, fast." Then Sophie found it, a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, tucked behind a jar of dried roots. She opened it carefully, her breath catching as she recognized Nora's handwriting, the same looping script from the library's archives. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "Nora's journal." The teens gathered around, the lantern casting long shadows as Sophie read aloud. The entries were fragmented, written in haste, but they painted a vivid picture of Nora's life. She'd been a healer, not a witch, using herbs to treat the town's sick until their fear turned to accusations. In 1964, during the drought, she'd discovered the sentinel tree's power, its roots tied to an ancient Algonquin spirit. Nora believed she could protect the forest by binding her soul to the tree, a ritual to keep the land safe from loggers and greed. But the ritual went wrong. The journal described a night in 1965 when the loggers stormed her cabin, their anger fueled by rumors of her witchcraft. Nora fled to the Sentinel, her chants blending with the blizzard, but the spirit she'd summoned was not benevolent. It was vengeful, born of her fear and the forest's pain. The wailing shade was her soul, twisted and decayed, bound to the Sentinel and cursed to hunt intruders. The final entry was scrawled in panic. "The tree is my strength, my prison. To free me, burn it. But beware, the shade will fight." Sophie's voice faltered, her eyes wide. "Burn the Sentinel," she whispered. "That's how we stop it." Amelia's mind raced, piecing together the plan. The Sentinel's close. We saw it running. If we burn it, the shade's gone, and we're free. Lucas shook his head, his voice sharp. "Burn a massive tree? In this fog? We've got no fuel, no time." Mason cracked his knuckles, his resolve hardening. "We've got matches, and I saw a can of lighter fluid in the chest. We make it work, or we die." Sophie clutched her necklace, her prayers now for courage, not just protection. "Nora didn't mean this," she said. "We're finishing what she started." The wail returned, louder, closer, shaking the cabin's walls. The windows rattled, and the fog outside pulsed, as if the shade sensed their discovery. Mason grabbed the lighter fluid, his arm still numb but his grip steady. Amelia tucked the journal into her jacket, her journalist's heart vowing to tell Nora's story. Lucas lit the lantern brighter, his tech skills useless but his will unbroken. Sophie traced a symbol on the floor, a ward for luck, her faith in Nora's intent guiding her. The door splintered, the shade's claws scraping the wood, its wail a deafening roar of rage and sorrow. "Now!" Amelia shouted, and the teens burst out of the cabin, running toward the sentinel, their last hope for survival. The forest was a gauntlet, the fog thicker, the pines closing in. The sentinel loomed ahead, its massive trunk a dark giant in the mist, its roots sprawling like veins, its branches clawing the sky. The wail followed, the shade's decayed form gliding through the fog, its hollow eyes locked on them. Amelia led the way, her flashlight flickering, her voice urging them on. "Almost there." Sophie stayed close, her prayers a steady rhythm, her eyes on the tree. Lucas stumbled, his cracked glasses slipping, but he kept running, the lantern swinging wildly. Mason brought up the rear, the lighter fluid sloshing in his hand, his arm burning with cold, but his heart burning with fight. They reached the sentinel, its bark etched with symbols, its presence a weight that pressed on their souls. The shade emerged, its wail shattering the air, its claws reaching. Amelia poured the lighter fluid on the roots, her hands shaking but precise. Sophie struck a match, her prayers now a chant, her faith in Nora's redemption unwavering. Lucas held the lantern high, its flame a beacon in the fog, his fear replaced by defiance. Mason lit the match, his voice a growl. "Burn, you bastard!" The flames caught, licking the roots, spreading to the trunk. The shade screamed, a sound that tore at their minds, its form thrashing as the fire grew. The forest seemed to scream with it, the fog swirling, the pines trembling. The teens backed away, the heat searing their faces, the wail reaching a fever pitch. The sentinel burned, its symbols glowing red, its roots cracking like bones. The shade lunged, its claws grazing Lucas's shoulder, but the flames weakened it, its form fraying like ash. Sophie shouted, "Nora, we're sorry," a plea to the woman trapped in the curse. The tree groaned, its trunk splitting, and the shade's wail became a cry of release, not rage. With a final blinding flare, the sentinel collapsed, the flames consuming its heart. The shade dissolved, its decayed body crumbling into the fog, its wail fading into silence. The forest stilled, the fog lifting, the pines no longer a threat, but just trees. The teens collapsed, their bodies trembling, their minds reeling. Amelia clutched the journal, tears streaking her face, her story now one of survival. Lucas touched his shoulder, the cold fading, his rationality returning but forever changed. Sophie held her necklace, her prayers now thanks. Her belief in Nora vindicated. Mason flexed his arm, the numbness gone, his thrill-seeking replaced by a quiet strength. Dawn broke, its light piercing the canopy, revealing a forest that felt alive in a new way. Not cursed, but free. They'd faced the wailing shade, and won. But the cost was etched in their eyes, their silence, their bond. The dawn that broke over Randolph Forest on October 18th, 2024, was unlike any the Hollow had seen in decades. The fog that had clung to the pines for generations lifted, revealing a sky of pale gold and blue, its light filtering through the branches like a promise. The air, once heavy with the stench of decay, carried the clean scent of pine sap and damp earth, and the silence that had suffocated the forest gave way to the chatter of birds and the rustle of squirrels. The wailing shade, the decayed spirit born of Nora Quinn's cursed ritual, was gone, its wail silenced when Amelia Harper, Lucas Bennett, Sophie Chen, and Mason Rivera burned the sentinel tree, severing its tie to the land. The teens had emerged from the forest battered, shaken, and forever changed, but they had done the impossible. They had broken the curse, of Randolph Forest. The four friends stumbled out of the hollow at first light, their clothes torn, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. Amelia, the 17-year-old journalist, clutched her cracked phone, its final recordings a chaotic mix of wails, screams, and her own determined voice. Her hazel eyes, once bright with ambition, were shadowed by what she'd seen, the shade's hollow eyes, its claw-like fingers, the forest's predatory pulse. Lucas, the 18-year-old techie, carried his broken GoPro, its lens cracked, his glasses smudged and bent. His skepticism had been shattered, replaced by a quiet awe at their survival. Sophie, the 16-year-old history buff, held her cross necklace, her braid undone, her prayers now a murmur of gratitude. Mason, the 19-year-old thrill-seeker, limped from a twisted ankle, his hatchet lost in the stream, his bravado humbled by the shade's relentless pursuit. They collapsed on the forest's edge, near the fated Randolph Forest. Enter at your own risk sign, their breaths visible in the crisp morning air. The trailhead was a mile from Randolph's main road, and as they sat, catching their breath, a passing hiker spotted them. Within hours, the town was abuzz with their story. The teens were taken to the local clinic, treated for cuts, bruises, and Mason's sprained ankle. Their parents, frantic after discovering the lie about the state park camping trip, arrived with a mix of relief and anger. But it was the footage on Amelia's phone, grainy, shaky, but unmistakable, that set Randolph on fire. The wail, the glimpse of the shade's decayed form, the teens' terrified voices. It was proof, undeniable and chilling, that the legend was real. The story spread like wildfire, not just in Randolph but across Maine and beyond. Amelia uploaded her recordings to her blog, Randolph Uncovered, expecting a few hundred views. By the next day, the post had gone viral, racking up millions of hits, shared by paranormal enthusiasts, news outlets, and TikTok creators. Headlines screamed, "Teens survive haunted Maine forest, wailing shade caught on camera, Randolph Forest, curse broken." The footage was debated endlessly. Skeptics called it a hoax, believers hailed it as evidence of the supernatural, and locals, who'd lived in the hollow's shadow for generations, simply nodded as if they'd always known. The teens became reluctant celebrities, their faces plastered across social media, their story a modern legend in the making. Randolph itself was transformed. The forest, once a place of fear and avoidance, began to heal. Hikers ventured onto the trails, their boots crunching on pine needles, their voices echoing where silence had reigned. Birdwatchers reported sightings of species absent for decades, and botanists marveled at wildflowers blooming in clearings that had been barren. The stream near the teens' campsite ran clear, its water no longer black and still. The pines seemed to stand taller, their branches less menacing, their shadows softer in the sunlight. The oppressive weight that had defined the hollow was gone, replaced by a sense of renewal, as if the forest was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Nora Quinn's cabin, the crumbling heart of the legend, was no exception. Hikers found it weeks later, its sagging beams overtaken by moss, its boarded windows collapsed under the weight of new vines, the symbols carved into its walls, once feared as marks of witchcraft, were faded, their power spent. The jars of herbs, the shelves of roots, had crumbled to dust, reclaimed by the earth. The cabin was no longer a place of dread, but a relic, a footnote in the forest's rebirth. Some said it was the Sentinel's destruction that freed the land, others that Nora's soul, trapped in the wailing shade, had finally found peace. Either way, the Hollow was no longer cursed, its secrets laid bare by 4 teenagers who'd dared to face its darkness. The teens, though, carried the scars of their ordeal, both visible and hidden. Amelia returned to school a changed person. Her blog's success earned her a scholarship to a journalism program, but she no longer chased viral fame. Instead, she wrote about Randolph's history, its folklore, its people, stories of resilience and truth. Her nightmares were frequent, filled with hollow eyes and wails, but she channeled them into her work. Determined to honor the forest's legacy, she kept her cracked phone as a reminder, its recordings a testament to their survival. "We didn't just break a curse," she wrote in a follow-up post. "We gave the Hollow a chance to heal, and maybe Nora a chance to rest." Lucas, once the skeptic, found his worldview upended. He abandoned his tech obsession for a while, haunted by the memory of his failing GoPro and the Shade's shadow in the fog. But his curiosity endured, and he began studying environmental science, focusing on Maine's forests. He wanted to understand what made the Hollow unique, why it had held Nora's curse for so long. His cracked glasses became a memento, a symbol of the night he stopped believing in only what he could see. Lucas also helped digitize Randolph's archives, preserving old journals and photos, including those mentioning Nora Quinn. "I thought ghosts were fake," he told a local reporter. "Now I know some things can't be explained, but they can be respected." Sophie, the quiet historian, emerged with a newfound strength. Her faith, tested by the Shade's terror, had held, and her cross necklace remained a constant companion. She dove deeper into Maine's past, researching Algonquin legends and the women like Nora who'd been misunderstood. Sophie started a school club, Randolph Roots, to share stories of the town's folklore, ensuring Nora's legacy wasn't reduced to a ghost story. Her sketches, though lost in the clearing, lived on in new drawings, vibrant images of the forest's renewal, with saplings and sunlight replacing shadows. Nora wasn't a witch, Sophie said at a town meeting. She was a healer who made a mistake. We set her free. Her nightmares were softer, filled with Nora's face, not the Shade's, and she felt a quiet pride in their victory. Mason, the thrill-seeker, swore off danger for good. The Shade's touch, its icy grip on his arm, left a faint scar, a reminder of his mortality. He traded kayaking and cliff jumping for volunteering, helping maintain Randolph's trails and teaching kids about forest safety. His limp faded, but his bravado never fully returned. Instead, he found purpose in protecting the Hollow, ensuring no one else faced its wrath. Mason spoke at community events, sharing their story with a mix of humor and gravity, always ending with a warning. Respect the forest. It's got stories older than us. His friends became his anchor, their bond forged in fear and survival, and he wore a pine needle pendant, a gift from Sophie, as a symbol of their triumph. The Randolph community embraced the change. The town's annual fall festival, once held far from the forest, moved to the trailhead, with bonfires, storytelling, and tours of the healing Hollow. Locals shared tales of the wailing Shade, no longer with fear but with reverence, a nod to the teens who'd ended its reign. A plaque was erected near the forest's edge, inscribed with the words, "To Amelia, Lucas, Sophie, and Mason, who faced the darkness and brought light to Randolph Forest, October 2024. The Sentinel's clearing, where the cursed tree had stood, became a place of pilgrimage. A sapling grew there, its leaves vibrant green, its roots shallow but strong. Hikers left stones around it, a quiet tribute to Nora and the forest's rebirth. Years passed, and the legend of the Wailing Shade faded into folklore, told with a smile rather than a shiver. Hikers roamed the hollow freely, their laughter echoing where wails once rang. Randolph's children played near the forest's edge, unafraid, their games inspired by the teens' courage. The town's library expanded its folklore section, with Sophie's essays and Lucas's digitized archives drawing scholars from across New England. Amelia's articles were published in regional magazines, her voice a bridge between past and present. Mason led guided hikes, his stories keeping the Hollow's history alive. Yet the forest never fully forgot its past. On quiet nights, when the moon hung low, some hikers swore they heard a faint whisper, not a wail, but a sigh, soft and sorrowful, as if Nora's spirit lingered, watching over the land she'd tried to protect. The sapling in the sentinel's clearing grew taller, its branches reaching for the sky, a symbol of renewal and resilience. And in the hearts of Amelia, Lucas, Sophie, and Mason, the hollow remained a place of awe, a reminder that courage could conquer even the darkest curses.